Welcome, fellow sinners. Tonight's story has everything. Poltergeist activity witnessed by police, firefighters, neighbors, a priest, Ed and Lorraine Warren, apparitions, unexplained voices, and yes, even a talking cat.
Most everyone's mad here.
And the strangest part, no one can really agree on what really happened inside 966 Lindley Street. Tonight we travel back to Bridgeport, Connecticut, into the small, unassuming home at 966 Lindley Street, a house that would soon become the epicenter of one of the most controversial and strangest poltergeist cases in American history. We start with Jerry and Laura Gooden, who lived in a quiet, small, modest home. But tragedy struck when their 7-year-old son with cerebral palsy passed away from a fever. Heartbroken, they eventually decided to adopt a little girl named Marcia, a shy and intelligent child originally from Canada with Iroquois heritage. And almost from the moment Marcia entered the home, the house began to change. At first, it was small things, objects disappearing and reappearing, knocks and raps on the walls. The Goodens brushed it off, and when things would go missing, Jerry would just kind of blame it on his age and kind of assume, oh, I must be getting old, I just forget where I put things. And initially, these strange occurrences were a bit more annoying rather than frightening to the family. But there was something else. Jerry and Laura were said to be very protective of Marcia, and it is said that especially Laura was extremely overprotective, that she had a genuine fear that something was going to happen to Marcia, so she would walk Marcia to and from school every single day. She even controlled who Marcia was allowed to play with, which was not very many kids. Jerry and Laura's neighbors had a young daughter, and she was one of the few, if not the only kids who were allowed to play with Marcia every now and then. And one day, while this little girl went over to Marcia's home, she walked into Marcia's room, and it is said that she heard Marcia speaking in a strange voice. This little girl then asks Marcia, like, hey, what are you doing? Marcia responded to this and told her, I'm talking to my grandfather. He's angry that the Goodens took me away from my tribe. And things only got worse. At school, Marcia would face brutal bullying. She would get mocked for her complexion and for her native heritage. At one point, one of her classmates beat her so bad that Marcia ended up in a back brace. After that, the Goodens just pulled her from school entirely, and I honestly don't blame them. But unfortunately, due to this, Marcia became even more isolated, and then the activity just seemed to explode. It was November 22nd of 1974 when the pounding on the walls began. They were loud, sometimes violent. The next day, a television allegedly slid across the room and fell onto Laura's foot, breaking one of her toes. Laura had to be taken to St. Vincent's Hospital. Soon after, the family claimed to have seen a disembodied hand appear outside of one of their windows. But when they ran to check, there was nobody there. Then came 3 knocks on the front door. Laura walks up to the door, opens it, but she finds no one outside. What she did find were wet footprints on the ground, as if someone had been standing there, despite the fact that it was completely dry out. By the evening of November 24th, the activity was undeniable. Chairs would move, tables would flip over, a knife holder even flew from a wall. And Marcia, well, she'd be standing right next to her father when most of these things would happen. Her father claimed she was too close to him to be orchestrating any of it, and that she seemed too small to cause the chaos that they were witnessing. Terrified, the Goodens called their friends Harold and Mary Hoffman for help. The Hoffmans come over to their home, and they said it looked like the home had been ransacked. The tables were overturned, dishes were everywhere, a television was on its side, and Harold lifted the TV back up to kind of put it back in place. And moments later, after he did this, another television began rocking violently on its own, even though he was the only one in the room at the time. But this was only the beginning. One of the Goodins' neighbors was actually a police officer. Patrolman Holsworth entered the home and he saw something that would stay with him forever. The refrigerator lifted off the ground, rotated, and then set itself back down. The refrigerator even allegedly brushed the officer's elbow slightly as it did this. It didn't cause him any serious injuries, thankfully, but he saw this happen in front of him. The officer then goes on to examine the property, to check for any trickery, wires, did they lift this somehow? But he found nothing. So then backup is called and more officers begin to arrive. And all or most of the officers witnessed something in this home. Officer Tomek, I apologize for any mispronunciations on names. Officer Tomek said, "What we saw was totally unexpected. Some of the policemen were really frightened. Officers saw shelves fly off the walls, chairs vibrate and hop, a crucifix shake and fall off the wall, a TV rotate on its own to face the wall, furniture glide across floors, and one officer, Patrolman Lawson, was nearly struck by a picture frame that launched off of the wall. Another officer, George F. Wilson Jr., saw chairs bouncing around the living room. Mrs. Goodin was said to be so terrified that she would clutch the rosary around her neck when all of this was happening, as she was a devout Catholic. Another officer, Patrolman Cal Leonzi, kept a close eye on Marcia. He was kind of determined to catch her in the act, she has to be doing this, right? So he doesn't take his eyes off of her. But he said that he was almost 100% certain that she wasn't causing any of this. He even claimed to witness Marcia herself be thrown backward 3 times in a heavy armchair. He and the other officers then tried to recreate the motion or the movement they had seen occur while Marcia was sitting on this chair, but even a 235-pound man could not make the chair move in that same way. The Bridgeport Fire Department was also called to inspect the house for structural or electrical problems. But again, they found nothing. Firefighters also witnessed a recliner float several inches off of the floor, rattling crucifixes, pictures leaping from walls, chairs somersaulting, a television spinning, and yet more objects levitating. Even a radio news reporter by the name of Tim Quinn saw Marcia get slammed against a wall as if by an invisible force. Marcia was even left with a bump on her head. At this point, there were cops, firefighters, journalists, neighbors, and dozens more witnesses, yet still zero answers. Finally, a Catholic priest arrived. Father William Charbonneau, an assistant pastor and a teacher of occult studies. He spent 10 hours inside of the home and he checked for fraud again to see if there was any wires, traps, or any tricks being played of any sort. But as you guessed, he found absolutely nothing. He claimed to have witnessed furniture tipping by itself, drawers falling, objects flying, and yes, he said he heard the cat speak. And you're never going to guess what this cat said. According to him, the cat said, "Jingle bells." I've always wondered what my cat would say if it could speak. And out of all the things I thought it would say, let me tell you, that is one of the last things I would think that my cat would say. But this is what he thought the cat said. Also, though, cats do be sounding like they can talk sometimes. Have you heard it? My cat be sounding like it's saying stuff when it's like, "Row, row." Whoa, that was horrible. Maybe the cat just made like one of these weird sounds cats be making. And he's like, "It's a jingle bells." Now enter the famous Ed and Lorraine Warren, or infamous, depending on how you view them. I know there is a lot of mixed emotions, feelings, and opinions when it comes to Ed and Lorraine Warren. I'm just here to give you the information. You make of it what you will, okay? So Ed and Lorraine Warren arrive next. But this case isn't one of the ones that they talked too much about or that you may have heard too much about. Why? Because the Goodins eventually kicked them out. Not because of a fight over money, because Ed and Lorraine Warren did not charge the family any money for their services, but because the Warrens contacted the media and the crowd outside the house ballooned to nearly 1,500 people or more. The Goodins felt overwhelmed and betrayed by the Warrens because the Warrens, from what I've heard, would never charge for their services, but they had to make their money somehow. And the way they profited off of their cases was to immediately alert the media, do interviews, lectures, speeches. And the Goodins were one of those families that were the complete opposite. They wanted zero media attention. They're like, don't tell anyone. It's already chaotic as it is because the nosy neighbors were already, they're seeing firefighters, police officers, they're like, what's going on over there? And their house is this little house. So, the nosy neighbors and, crowds started to gather outside of their home. But it was nothing compared to when Ed and Lorraine Warren arrived and Ed alerts the media. Ed alerts the media and he's like, hey, you guys got to come check this out. So now instead of being this like small kind of crowd or maybe medium-sized crowd, it just grew to like an uncontrollable crowd. Lorraine Warren later said, never in my life did I see so many police officers get down on their knees and ask for a priest's blessing as in that house. The Warrens believe that an exorcism should have been done, but it never was. Now, the house was blessed, but never exorcised. During one of the visits, investigator Paul Eno, who was accompanying Ed and Lorraine Warren during their investigation at the Goodins' home at the time, Paul Eno said he witnessed a burn appear on Lorraine's wrists out of nowhere. And in an interview I saw him speaking where he speaks about this, I'll try to link that in the description. He says that they were sitting at a table and it just suddenly, like, Lorraine kind of screamed out and then like looked at her hand and then there was just like this burn on her wrist. But later, Marcia would claim that she had seen Lorraine burn herself under hot water. So according to Marcia, she said she saw Lorraine Warren open the hot water in the faucet or the sink and then like do this, and that's where the burn had come from. Again, I'm just here to share the information. Y'all come to your own conclusions. But this right here, this brings us to the turning point. Eventually, Marcia herself also confessed that she had faked the activity, the moving objects, the making noises, and even throwing her voice to sound like the cat. So she's a ventriloquist. But here's where it gets complicated. Witnesses claim police pressured and interrogated Marcia very harshly. Some say she confessed just to make the attention stop. Some officers believed her, others didn't. And Ed Warren insisted no 10-year-old child who weighs 70 pounds could hoax everything we saw in full view of police, firemen, and investigators. It is said that like the police chief called it or labeled it all a hoax, because he was also concerned of like his police department being made fun of or getting mocked. It is said he thought like, what are people gonna say of us as a police department if we're claiming that it's a ghost, And they also wanted to get rid of the large crowd outside because of the home, because I heard it started like obstructing with traffic, and this was a little home, and so imagine all these people surrounding this small little tiny home. Like, it was just causing too much chaos. During their investigation, Ed, Lorraine Warren, and Paul Eno stayed a little longer in the Goodins' home, and the family decided to gather around the table to play a game of Monopoly in an effort to calm the tension. But instead of easing the atmosphere, something shifted. Paul later said he could feel a strange force thickening the air around them. Then the smell of sulfur drifted through the room. Before anyone could react, a gauzy mist began forming near the center of the living room. The fog twisted, curled, and slowly took shape, not into one figure, but 4 shadowy silhouettes assembling as if stepping through some unseen doorway. One of these figures moved toward Marcia. Paul Eno stepped in front of her and he said the entity pressed against him. Paul Eno claimed he could feel some sort of a force from this figure or entity, and he described it as bird-like. Then, as if yanked by invisible hands, Marcia was lifted off her feet and thrown to the floor. Amidst the chaos, Jerry, who reportedly didn't know Latin, suddenly began praying in a fluent Latin in a voice that didn't sound like his own. So what really happened? Even now, no one can seem to agree. You see, Marcia was caught by a certain police officer, when she was sitting on the floor. Apparently he saw her kind of slightly kick a television set, and he told her, like, why'd you do that? So then that's the bad thing, that once you get caught faking one thing, it's hard to take everything else seriously. But my question is, if she was faking everything, how the F did she manage to lift a whole ass refrigerator? Like, because either this was real poltergeist activity, or this little girl was a genius, because if she's faking moving like big objects like that, how did she do that? And some of these things were said to have happened while Marcia was still in a back brace. So that's even more impressive if she was faking it. Because how? ¿Cómo? Laura died in a car accident in 1994, and Jerry continued living in the home until he passed several years later. Marcia has also since passed as well and was buried on family land. After that infamous winter of 1974, the house became quiet, the activity stopped, and the mystery remains sealed behind its walls. Some say it was all a hoax, some are convinced it was genuine poltergeist activity. Others believe the house sat on a tear between dimensions. Some point out that too many credible witnesses saw too many impossible things for it to all be fake. So what do you think happened inside of 966 Lindley Street? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time. Adios. I don't know what I'm doing. Bye.
Subscribe.